He overheard my friends mocking him about my affair. I came home to find him gone. Hello, Reddits. My name is Laura, and I'm 34 years old. I've been married to Jake, my husband, for about 11 years now, and we have 2 beautiful kids, Evan, who's 9, and Sophie, who's 5. Jake had always been the kind of man anyone would call dependable, the type of husband and father who never misses a bedtime story, who always shows up for school recitals and Sunday soccer games. Our home had always been cozy, our days were predictable and practical, and to anyone else, I have the life most people would envy. But I didn't feel the same way as people did. I didn't feel enviable or like I had the best life. The truth is, I haven't felt like myself in years. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was after Sophie was born, or maybe even before that. But at some point, I stopped feeling excited about my own life. Every day started to look the same, and I find myself going through the same thing. Waking up at the right time, helping the kids prepare for school, while also preparing breakfast and also preparing for work. It was the same thing every day, and I found myself getting frustrated and tired by it. I've tried to convince myself that it was normal, and that it was just what happens after years of marriage and kids. That the passion and excitement we used to have can't last forever, and that this quiet comfort is what love becomes. But the more I tell myself that, the more restless I feel. It's not that Jake did anything wrong. He was still the same kind, reliable man that he had always been. But somewhere along the way, I started to wonder if that's enough. Or maybe it was me being selfish. I didn't talk to Jake about how I was feeling. I should have, I know that now. But I didn't, because I told myself that he wouldn't understand, that he was too focused on work and the kids to notice how distant I'd become. I kept my thoughts to myself, letting the gap between us grow wider. And then my dissatisfaction has caused me my whole existence. I had made a mistake. No, not a mistake, a decision, a horrible one, and it's one I'm paying so dearly for now. Looking back now, I realize just how selfish and dishonest with myself I was. And I didn't realize just how wrong I was until it was too late, until the life I thought I could handle, the life I thought I could balance, came crashing down around me. Until the world I've always known turned against me in a way that has completely left me ruined. Jake had never given me any reason to doubt his love and affection, to be honest. In many ways, he had stepped up in all the ways you'd expect a good husband and father to. He worked long hours to ensure we were comfortable and still made time for the kids and I. But for some reason, the more he leaned into being a dependable family man, the more I felt invisible. I know how that sounds. Ungrateful. But it just felt like I wasn't his wife anymore. I was just a co-parent, a partner, but not in the way I'd want us to beg. There was no passion left between us, no spark. We were always so busy. There were bills that needed paying, the kids' needs, and everything else. Although he paid for most of it and I contributed with the little that I can, but it felt like amongst all those things that needed doing, there wasn't any time for us. And when there was, it felt forced. Jake would plan a date night, and I've always felt it was only out of obligation, so I just sit stiffly through the dinner or movie and wait for it to be over. Or maybe it was just me. Maybe I was the one overthinking things or wanting something that wasn't missing in the first place. But then I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something vital, something that made me feel alive. I missed being desired, being seen as more than just a mother or a wife. I missed the version of myself that felt spontaneous and wasn't tied to responsibilities and being a role model for our kids. So that was why it was so easy for me to cheat on Jake. I cheated on him with Sean. I met Sean at work. He was assigned to a collaborative project with my team, and from the very first meeting, there was something about him that pulled me in. He wasn't just attractive, which he definitely was. With his easy smile and sharp wit, he had this aura that made it very easy to trust him and want to be close to him. He had a way of making everyone around him feel special, like they were the only person in the room that mattered. And when he started to pay attention to me, I didn't know how to handle it. At first, it really was harmless. Sean and I would talk casually in the office, sharing jokes and laughing together. He would tease me, and I would blush deeply. We even became lunch buddies. He would compliment me on my ideas, praise my work, and tell me things that even though Jake says them every time, it still felt brand new coming from someone that wasn't Jake. He would say things about how smart I was, how capable, how impressive I was. I liked the way he looked at me. the way his eyes lingered just a little too long, the way his voice softened when he said my name. I felt seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. The first time Sean had asked me to meet on a weekend, I had agreed without thinking much about it. I ignored the way my heart was racing and managed to convince myself that it was nothing, just two work buddies going out. We went for lunch, and I thought of it as fun. Sean was quite smart and funny. He was able to make me feel all the things I thought were missing in my life, and it is very easy for me to fall for him. Sean asked about my life outside of work, about my dreams, my hobbies, the things that made me happy. He didn't just ask, he listened, making me feel so important and like everything I said mattered. It didn't take long for things to escalate between us. Sean and I started texting outside of work. Our conversation started becoming more flirty and personal with each passing day. He called me beautiful, sexy, irresistible, and other words that were meant to impress me. And I believed every word, craving the excitement and validation he gave me. The first time we kissed was during another work meeting. We met at a local bar, and Sean had sat beside me and listened to me talk. This time, I was ranting to him about Jake and how much responsibilities I had and how bad things were between us. Sean placed my hand in his as if to sympathize with me, and after some minutes, I expected him to drop my hands, but instead he had done something else. He had kissed me, but had even been polite and had asked if he could kiss me. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes, but my body language must have told him I wanted it, because when he leaned in, I didn't pull away. His lips were soft. His touch was confident, but not exactly gentle. But despite that, I felt wanted, and I allowed him to kiss me even more. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. By the time we pulled apart, I knew there was no going back, that it was inevitable. Maybe it was, and I just wasn't thinking of the near future to care much about the damning consequences. Our first night together happened just a week later. I told Jake I was working late. It was a lie, but Jake made it all easier to tell by not asking me further questions. I thought then that he didn't care enough to want to find out, but I realize now that he had just trusted me enough to believe every word I said. Sean booked a hotel room, and when I walked through the door, he was already waiting for me. He pulled me into his arms, and I didn't resist as I went into them. He wasted no time in reaching for the zip behind my dress and dragging it down, while feathering tiny kisses on my shoulder blade and my neck. I allowed him to drop down my dress, knowing I wore nothing but my panties underneath it, and let him explore my body. Somehow, we ended up on the king-size bed and spent the next few hours exploring each other's body in a way that was both wrong and exciting. The intensity of it was overwhelming, and for those few hours, I forgot about everything else, my marriage, my kids, the guilt that would come later. I felt a high I hadn't felt in years, and I didn't want it to end. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare skin. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. I laid there on the hotel bed, my naked body tangled with another man's, who was not my husband, and still yet, I waited for the feeling of guilt. The whispers of how I had a husband and that I just committed adultery. I waited for that silent niggling of my conscience, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt exhilarated, like I had reclaimed a part of me that had been buried for years. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just physical, just a distraction, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Over the next month, Sean and I fell into a routine of secret meetings. We also texted severally, especially at night, like we hadn't just been in each other's arms during the day. He was my escape from my reality, and so I enjoyed those moments thinking, or maybe hoping that this will last forever. I became a master at lying to Jake, telling him I had to stay late at work, inventing errands that didn't exist, creating excuses that he never questioned. He was too focused on work and the kids, too oblivious to notice the changes in me. I even joked about it to Sean, calling Jake too trusting, and laughing about how clueless he was. The truth is, Jake wasn't clueless. He trusted me, and I exploited that trust. I told myself it wasn't a betrayal because I was still doing everything I was supposed to as a wife and mother. I was still there for the kids, still cooking them breakfast, still keeping the house running. But the distance between Jake and me just kept growing, even though I deluded myself by ignoring it and thinking it as the normal. I even stopped seeing him as a person and started seeing him as an obstacle, a reminder of the fact that I was being unfaithful. I opened up about it to my friends, framing it as a harmless fling when I could no longer keep it to myself. I knew what I was doing was just wrong, but I just couldn't stop. I wanted someone else to help justify what I was doing. Someone else should think of it as the right thing to do to escape the harsh reality of my life, a thing to do to just remain happy. So during a girls' night at my house, after a few glasses of wine, I told them everything, how Sean and I met, how he made me feel and how thrilling it was, being able to manage both relationships with the two men with one being totally clueless about the other. Looking back now, I can see how cruel it was, how thoughtless and selfish I had become. But at the time, I just wanted so badly to justify my actions and not make myself look bad. I didn't care about anything else. I didn't realize how far I had fallen until it was too late. It was supposed to be a typical girls' night. The kids were already asleep upstairs, tucked into bed, and Jake had left for what I thought would be a late night at the office. He had kissed me on the cheek before heading out, telling me he had a big project to finish, and I was barely listening while trying to prepare for my friend's arrival. It wasn't unusual for him to stay late, and I was grateful for the time to myself. The house was quiet, the atmosphere light, and I was looking forward to letting my guard down and just talking. By the time my friends arrived, the wine was flowing, and so was the conversation. We were catching up on life, talking about work and the kids, but as the night went on, I felt myself getting really bold as I got whenever I was with them. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the way they leaned in when I talked, giving me their full attention, but I felt like I could say anything, and I did. I started by venting about Jake, casually bringing up how predictable and boring he had become. I told them about how he never noticed the little things anymore, how our relationship had turned into nothing more than a partnership in running a household. I know, I was making him into a bad person, but I just needed someone to badly understand why I felt the need to do what I was doing. My friends nodded along, encouraging me to keep going, and I didn't feel the need to hold back, not with them. They understood me, or at least I thought they did. Then I started talking about Sean. At first I tried to jump over some bits so they didn't get all the details, but it didn't take long before I was telling them everything. And I told them about how we'd met at work and about the chemistry that had sparked between us almost immediately. I talked about how he made me feel alive, desired, like I was the most important person in the room. I even told them about the hotels, about the way he touched me, about the thrill of sneaking around. They laughed as I shared details, their faces a mixture of shock and amusement, so I kept going, telling them every tiny detail, not leaving anything out. I said the things that had been swirling around in my head, but that I'd never admitted out loud. I said Sean made me feel alive in a way Jake never could, and as the words left my mouth, I felt a strange mix of triumph and guilt. My friends laughed again as they listened to me talk, and their reactions kept fueling my sense of justification. But what I hadn't realized was that Jake had come home. I found out later that his meeting had been canceled unexpectedly. He decided to come home early, probably thinking he'd surprise me or spend a little extra time with the kids before bed. He must have parked in the driveway and let himself in quietly, not wanting to interrupt our evening. I imagine he must have walked into the house and paused when he heard the voices coming from the living room, deciding to listen before announcing himself. And I had no idea he was there as I sat on the couch with my friends, laughing and spilling details I should have kept to myself. I didn't know he was there when I talked about how boring he was. My friends had laughed, calling him a wimp who didn't know what was going on right under his nose, and I had laughed as they said it, agreeing with them. But I didn't know he was there when I shared things about Sean that no husband should ever have to hear. And I certainly didn't know he was there when I said those words, those awful, damning words about how Sean made me feel alive in ways Jake never could. I can only imagine what he must have felt at that moment. The shock, the betrayal, the humiliation of hearing his wife talk about him that way, not just privately but in front of an audience. I wonder if his chest felt tight, if his hands shook, or if he fought back, barging into the room in anger and demanding answers as he listened. I wonder if he wanted to burst into the room and confront me, or if he just stood there frozen. But I can only wonder now because he hadn't confronted me. He had not said a word or announced himself. Instead, he turned around and walked out of the house as quietly as he had entered, leaving me to continue laughing with my friends, completely oblivious to what had just happened. Now, when I replay that night over and over in my head, I cannot stop thinking about the exact things Jake must have heard. Every cruel word, every laugh, every detail about Sean, it all replayed in my mind like a broken record. I've thought about how he must have felt when I mocked his routines, or when I joked about how clueless he was. I thought about how I had framed Jake as the problem in our marriage, painting him as this boring, predictable man. I thought about how I had made Sean sound like the hero of the story, the one who rescued me from my mundane life. And I thought about the way I had laughed, how light and carefree I had sounded, as though none of it mattered, as though Jake didn't matter. By the time my friends left and I started cleaning up, Jake was long gone. I didn't even know that. I just did my usual by going to check on the kids, as I usually did every night, and then I went to bed, not caring to wait up for Jake, knowing he probably would be late as he usually was. It was the next morning I realized that Jake didn't come home that night, and I assumed he had stayed late at work or had gone to visit his parents. Their house was quite close to his office, so it was something he occasionally did when he needed a break from the chaos of the house. I called him that morning to ask where he was, but he didn't take my calls or respond to my texts. I decided to stop by his workplace to drop off his lunch like I always did whenever I was off duty from work. But Jake was not at the office. I didn't understand what was happening. Jake was supposed to be at work, but he was gone without a word. I became really worried and wondered about where he might be. The only place that came to mind was his parents' place. So I went to his parents' place, but I still couldn't find him. I didn't know what to do, and it was evening before I got back home. And it wasn't until later that night when I went into our bedroom and found his wedding ring sitting on my nightstand that it all started to make sense. The sight of that ring, a small, simple band that he had worn every day since our wedding, made my stomach drop. It was like a punch to the gut. He knew, he had heard, and he was gone. He had dropped a small note beside the bed, and 3 words were written on it in his handwriting. I know everything. I didn't need to confirm anything to know. I just knew Jake found out he knew about my infidelity, and that ring was his response to it. He must have come home while I was out searching for him, and then... I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring, as the weight of what I had done came crashing down on me. I thought about the times I had lied to Jake, the nights I had spent with Sean, and the jokes I had made at Jake's expense. I had taken Jake's trust and shattered it, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I had destroyed. The next evening, after work, I came home still thinking about how to undo my mistakes. I wondered how I could make things right between Jake and me, how to make up for my betrayal, but I walked into a house that felt wrong. At first, I couldn't place what it was. Maybe it was the stillness, or the fact that the lights in the living room weren't on like they usually were when I got home. But something about it didn't feel right. I called out for Jake, expecting, or dare I say hoping, to hear him in the kitchen or upstairs with the kids, but there was no answer. The house was completely silent. I figured they were out running errands or maybe at his parents' house for dinner. It wasn't unusual for Jake to take the kids there when he wanted to give me some extra time to myself. I knew he must have dropped by because I could smell his cologne all over the kitchen. He must have picked up the kids. I kicked off my shoes and wandered into the kitchen, planning to pour myself a glass of water before texting the kids to ask where they were. But as I reached for my phone, I noticed something. The little whiteboard on the fridge, the one we used to keep track of schedules, notes, and reminders, was wiped clean. Every chore, every plan for the week, even the playful doodles the kids had drawn, it was all gone. My chest tightened, and for the first time, a flicker of panic crept in. I opened my messages and typed out a quick text to Evan. "Where are you guys? The house is so quiet without you." I hit send, expecting the familiar ding of a reply, but it never came. Instead, my message sat there, unread. I tried calling, but the line went straight to voicemail. I told myself his phone must have died, that he would call back soon, that there was no reason to worry. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I wandered upstairs, thinking I might find a note or some sign of where they had gone. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed the kids' rooms were oddly tidy. Their beds were made, their toys were neatly stacked on the shelves, and their backpacks were gone. My stomach churned as I checked Sophie's closet and saw that most of her clothes were missing. Evan's dresser was the same, half empty, like someone had carefully packed what he would need for a few days away. I moved to our bedroom next, my heart pounding harder with every step. Jake's side of the bed looked untouched, and his work bag, normally leaning against the nightstand, was gone. I opened the closet, and that's when the full weight of what was happening hit me. His clothes were missing, not all of them, but enough to tell me this wasn't just a quick trip to his parents' house. I stood there, staring at the empty hangers, my mind racing to fill in the blanks. Why would he take so much? I knew the answer to the question, but I stubbornly and crazily didn't want to accept it. I was scared of the conclusion my mind was reaching, and I couldn't just accept it. It was then I saw a file on the bed, and when I opened it, it contained a recording of what the girls and I had said that night when I decided to lose all my inhibitions and spew nonsense. I grabbed my phone and called Jake this time, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, each time hoping against hope that he would answer, but he didn't. The silence on the other end of the line and in the house felt so choking. I texted him, apologizing, begging him to come home, to talk to me, to let me explain. I told him I was sorry, that I hadn't meant what I said, that it was all a misunderstanding, but the messages, all of them, weren't read. Desperate for answers, I called Jake's parents, Dot. His mom answered on the second ring, her voice calm but distant. I asked if Jake and the kids were there, and she confirmed that they were. Relief flooded through me for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by dread as I realized she wasn't offering any more information. I asked to speak to Jake, but she said he didn't want to talk to me. Her tone was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard it before, and it was clear that she wasn't on my side. She told me that Jake needed time and space to process everything, and that I should respect that. When I tried to explain myself, she cut me off, saying she didn't think it was her place to get involved, and then she hung up. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Jake's parents had always been kind and supportive, treating me like a daughter, but now even they were shutting me out. I had never felt so alone. The next few days were a blur of unanswered calls, unopened messages, and an empty, silent house that felt less like a home with every passing hour. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the fact that I had ruined everything. I kept replaying the moment I found his ring on the nightstand, the quiet finality of it. I had spent so long trying to convince myself that Jake wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, that I had never stopped to consider how much he might have been holding inside. The kids' absence was the hardest part. I had always been the one to tuck them in, to pack their lunches, to kiss their scraped knees and listen to their stories about school. But now the house was empty, their laughter replaced by an unbearable silence. I didn't know how to fill the void they left behind, and I hated myself for being the reason they were gone. As the days stretched into what felt like an eternity, I started to realize the full extent of what I had done. It wasn't just the affair, or the lies, or the betrayal. It was the way I had treated Jake, the man who had always been there for me, who had loved me unconditionally, who had trusted me even when I didn't deserve it. I had taken him for granted, convinced myself that his love was something I could abuse without consequence. And now I was seeing the result of my selfishness. Jake had left, and he had taken the kids with him. He had chosen to walk away from the life we had built together because I had made it unbearable for him to stay. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't blame him. I had pushed him to this point, and now I had to face the consequences of my actions alone. Update. Hello, Reddit. The days after Jake left had been the longest and loneliest I've ever experienced. At first, I told myself he just needed time, that he'd come back when he cooled off, that he would maybe consider the years we've been together and the stability of the kids. But as days turned into weeks, the silence became deafening, and the truth started to sink in. Jake wasn't coming back. I tried reaching out to his parents again, hoping they'd give me some insight into what he was thinking, but all I got were clipped, distant responses. His mother told me he was safe, that the kids were with him, and that I needed to respect his need for space. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't have the courage to push her. The warmth I had always felt from Jake's family was gone, replaced by an iciness that made my stomach churn. I couldn't blame them. They knew what I had done. A few days later, a letter arrived from a lawyer. My hands trembled as I opened it, already fearing the worst. It was worse than I imagined. Jake was filing for divorce and seeking full custody of the kids. The letter outlined his reasoning in cold, detached language. My infidelity, my disrespectful behavior, and the unstable environment I had created by prioritizing my own desires over my family's well-being. Reading those words was like being punched in the chest. I couldn't breathe. I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching the letter, as the weight of everything I had lost came crashing down on me. If I thought my friends would rally around me during this time, I was wrong. The same women who had laughed with me about my affair, who had joked about Jake being clueless, were nowhere to be found. At first, I tried reaching out to them, hoping for sympathy or support, but they avoided me by making up different excuses. One of them stopped answering my calls entirely. Word of what had happened spread quickly in our community, and I became the subject of gossip. People who used to greet me with smiles now avoided eye contact. I heard rumors that some of my so-called friends had thrown me under the bus, blaming me entirely for what happened and distancing themselves to save their own reputations. One of them even told a mutual acquaintance that I had taken things too far and that they couldn't support me after what I had done. I realized too late that their laughter and encouragement during those girls' nights were hollow. They hadn't cared about me or my marriage. They had just enjoyed the drama and excitement of hearing about my affair. And when the fallout came, they didn't want to be anywhere near it. I was on my own, left to deal with the consequences of my actions without anyone to lean on. The silence in the house was suffocating. Without Jake and the kids, it didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a shell. I wandered through the empty rooms, staring at the toys the kids had left behind, the framed photos on the walls, the little reminders of the life I had destroyed. I couldn't escape the guilt. It followed me everywhere, weighing on me like a lead blanket. I feel so ashamed that I'm their mother. I've betrayed their trust and I've disappointed them. I didn't only cheat on Jake, but I also cheated on my kids. I cheated on their chance to have a stable family and a mother. I feel more and more like a failure each passing day because I failed the most important people in my life. And then, I keep replaying that night in my mind, imagining Jake standing in the hallway, hearing every cruel word I had said. I pictured the look on his face as he listened to me mock him, laughing with my friends about how predictable and boring he was. I thought about the moment he must have walked away, angry and realizing just how little I respected him. The image haunted me, playing over and over like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had been so thoughtless, so selfish. I had taken Jake's trust and love for granted, convincing myself that he wouldn't care about my betrayal because he was too focused on work and the kids. But that wasn't true. He had cared deeply, more than I ever realized, and I had broken his heart in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. Update. Hello, everyone. I don't think I will be making any further posts after this. I kept writing because there is nothing else for me to do, and I have no one to talk to or tell. I feel very lonely. Months have passed since Jake left with the kids and has left me broken, alone, and full of so much regret. And the silence between Jake and me remained unbroken. I had stopped calling and texting, knowing it wouldn't make a difference. The divorce was moving forward, and it was clear that Jake was determined to keep me away from himself and the kids. Then one day, I saw a photo on social media that stopped me in my tracks. It was a picture of Jake and the kids, taken outside a new house. The caption mentioned something about a fresh start, and the kids looked so happy, their smiles wide and carefree. Jake looked different too, relaxed, almost peaceful, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my chest tightening as I realized they were thriving without me. The life I had taken for granted was continuing without me, and I was nothing more than an outsider looking in. Rumors began circulating that Jake was seeing someone new. I didn't know if they were true, but the thought of him moving on while I was stuck in the wreckage of my choices was unbearable. I wanted to reach out to him, to beg for another chance, but I knew it was too late. He had built a new life, one that didn't include me, and I had no one to blame but myself. My social circle continued to shrink as more people found out about what I had done, and I became a topic of gossip everywhere I went. I could feel the judgment in their stares, hear the whispers when I walked into a room. People who used to greet me warmly now avoided me entirely. Even my family expressed their disappointment. My parents, who had always supported me, told me they couldn't understand how I could treat Jake so poorly. They said they had always admired him for his kindness and dedication, and that they were ashamed of how I had repaid him. Their support for me waned as they grew closer to Jake, who they now saw as the victim. I felt like I was losing everyone, one by one, until there was no one left. Sitting alone in this empty house, I finally began to understand the depth of what I had lost. I had spent so much time focusing on what I thought was missing in my life that I had ignored everything I already had. Jake wasn't perfect, but he was a good man, loyal, loving, and dependable. He had given me a stable, happy life, and I had thrown it all away for nothing. I thought I wanted excitement, passion, and freedom. But what I have now found is regret and emptiness. The memory of Jake leaving his wedding ring on the nightstand keeps haunting me, and the evidence of my betrayal I have kept in a file on the bed as a constant reminder of everything I had destroyed. It's all gone, just like the life we had built together. Redditors, I know I let my selfishness and immaturity destroy a good man and a beautiful family. Please don't make the same mistakes I did.